Welcome to the Cactus Computers building channel. We're excited to start up this series on YouTube and get this channel back up and running. So today we have a really special build for you guys. We're going to be doing an all-white 3080 5950X build in a Lian Li 011 Dynamic. Pretty much the go-to build for anybody right now that's looking to get into a setup, and it just seems like everybody and their mom wants an 011 Dynamic. Everybody wants all white components inside of their custom gaming desktop. So we're going to go with that trend today, and we're going to show you guys how to put a computer together as we go. One of the things when you're doing a computer build is the tools. So you're going to need some tools. They're pretty basic though. A lot of the components are easy to work with and can honestly be put in by hand. You do need a couple tools, and the ones that we recommend are really just a Phillips screwdriver. Typically recommend kind of like a larger one to do most of the component screws, and then a real tiny one. This usually comes in handy when you're doing the M.2 solid state drives, putting them in the board. You're gonna need a pair of like tweezers or snippers for when you're doing like your cable management, your zip ties. And then I always like to have a handy razor blade. That way you can cut open all your new component boxes and get all your components set up. First things first, let's talk about the case. This is the 011 Dynamic by Lian Li. It's a mid-tower, tons of room, pretty decent airflow. That's kind of been the downside of this case for most folks, is because it's got these two big glass panels on it. You have to move that air through the back and the top. But as you're going to see today, we're going to have plenty of fans, plenty of airflow going through this case so that we don't have too much back pressure or not enough airflow. Alright, now you might be asking yourself, if you're familiar with this case already, this looks a little bit different. And you're right, we have vinyl wrapped the edges here. Normally this is a black, like tinted strip, sort of like a car windshield. But because we're doing an all-white build, I wanted to go for that all-white look, and these glass panels honestly kind of kill it on the Lian Li 011 Dynamic when you're doing the white case, because the glass is always black. So, cool thing about this build is the way that it comes apart. So this top panel is kind of like the hold all together, and as you can see here, the glass then slides up, and it can't come off without that top panel being on there. Alright, now that we have the back panel off here, you can see kind of the guts. This is really the advantage of this case here, is because you can hide so much in the back, and the actual inside of the computer that you're going to be viewing through the glass is so set up for the components that do look good. I'm talking like your hard drives, your power supplies, kind of that stuff that you want to hide away in the back. Lian Li's done a great job with this case in getting those components kind of hidden back here, where honestly, if you looked at this case from the front, once it's all completed, most people don't even realize where the power supply is. Because we're not using any mechanical hard drives, we're actually going to pull this entire bay out of here just to free up this space. Alright, next thing is case prep. So I usually like to get all the little sandwich ties out of the case, and you can take your directions out and then toss them out the window because we don't need them. We're building this computer on our own. So in the back here, you're going to have your front panel cables. It's going to include, in this particular case, a USB-C adapter, power and reset, and LED lights. And then you got your HD audio for when you're plugging your headphones up front, and a couple USB ports. We're going to set our case aside and start cruising on the motherboard assembly. So here we're using the Asus X570 Pro. It is a Gen 4 compatible board. So when you're considering your board and your graphics card, right now that's something to consider with the newer 30 series cards, as they're Gen 4 capable. And when you're going into a PCI slot that's only Gen 3, you might see a slight bottleneck. So, grab a processor. In this case, we have the Ryzen 9 5950X. Fantastic processor. It's actually kicking Intel's butt right now as far as benchmarks and testing goes. Price is definitely on your higher end, but it is certainly cheaper than, say, a Threadripper, and it'll outcompete just about any, I'd say, entry-level processor on the market right now. And your i7, your i9s, it's gonna kind of blow those out of the water. With a processor, you always want to hold them by kind of the edges when you're touching these small prongs on the bottom that can end up causing issues, as well as the top, because this is where that heat transfer is going to be occurring. So you don't necessarily want to touch the top or the bottom, but you can hold these by the sides. You'll see Intel is actually the opposite of this. The pins are going to be on the motherboard versus the processor. So same thing though, you still don't want to touch the actual chip wafer on the bottom when you're handling these. Most important thing when you're installing the processor is this small, tiny triangle in the corner. That is going to be your indicator of where it goes on the actual motherboard itself. So we're going to be putting our processor in, matching up that triangle. And now you can tell it'll kind of seat in there, and you can slightly wiggle it back and forth from the edges to make sure it's secure. And then once you're ready, you're going to clasp down on that lever. Next up is going to be our RAM installs. We went with some Corsair Vengeance RGB Pro. It's a great set of RAM. It's gonna look really good with the RGB color in there. You can set it in the Corsair IQ software. One thing to consider though, if you are going with the Vengeance RGB Pro, that this RAM is pretty tall as far as this casing goes. If you're doing a top-mounted AIO, there is a possibility, depending on the case that you go with, that it may not fit in there. If you are doing that kind of a setup, I would recommend looking at the S Ls. It's going to be your slightly lower sized RAM and give you a little bit more clearance for that. Let's go ahead and pop these RAM sticks open and we'll get them installed. We'll show you how to clasp them in. There's a few different configurations when you're doing your RAM. You're either going to have 1, 2, or 4 sticks, I would say. And you'll see on the motherboard itself, you have different DIMM slots, different channels, and depending on what motherboard you go with, you may need to run a particular setup in order to cater for that board. On the motherboard itself, you're going to see that we have the 2 channels. You have your A and your B DIMMs. They're usually designated by different colors. In this particular case, ASUS has the kind of gray and the black DIMM slots going on here. So you have these levers at the top, and on this case, just the top. Some boards have it on the bottom as well, but we're going to use those levers to secure our RAM in. The way that we'll do that is you kind of want to handle these RAM sticks by their edges. You want to line up the DIMM slot, so this is not the right way. We're going to flip this around. We'll go ahead and start installing this RAM. These ones are going to kind of slide into the bottom first, and then you're going to get those good clicks as you're going in. Traditionally, if you're only running 2 RAM sticks, you'd be doing the 2 black slots. Sorry, actually your gray slots here. So it'd be your 2 and your 4. But in this case, because we're running 4 sticks, we're going to be lining them up in all 4 slots. You know it's secured when you hear that click going right into the slot there. If you ever need to remove RAM, you'll be pulling that lever up and then slightly wiggling those out to bring them up through. So our board now has its RAM and its processor installed there. Next up is our M.2 solid state drives. We chose to go with the ADATA XPG RGB S20Gs. That's a mouthful, I understand. But they are, I believe, 2500 megabyte per second read-write speeds. So 2 of these in this unit. It's going to be plenty of space for those massive games that are coming out now. And they're also going to look good because they got RGB on them. So I think that's, what, 20 extra frames per second, they usually say? Just kidding. So let's go ahead and install these on our motherboard. For that, we're going to go back to the smaller screwdriver that we talked about earlier in the tools section. So we have our solid state cover here. Normally it would be probably pretty good to keep these on, but in this particular case, because we're going with a good looking solid state, we're gonna remove this all together and keep it off. That way you can see that RGB on the board. That reveals your 2 M.2 slots. And we're gonna be filling both of those slots. You don't necessarily have to though. You can definitely go with a one NVMe and then a secondary, say, mechanical or solid state drive, more the 2.5 inch, 3.5 inch form factors. When you're installing an M.2, they slide into the slot, and then you're going to see a small screw that will end up securing that solid state in place. It's also important to make sure that you have your standoff screw in. Standoff screw is what's going to allow that solid state to sit perfectly perpendicular with the board. If you don't have that standoff in place, you're going to notice that the solid state is at a very phenomenal slant, which would not be good. Puts a lot of strain on the actual board itself. Now we're going to talk about your case standoffs. Very similar to the M.2 standoff. You want to make sure that your board is spaced out from the case, otherwise you'll have a static electricity discharge and will likely cause your board to fail. Oftentimes than not, we see custom desktops come into the store for diagnostics that are either missing standoff screws, or they don't have any standoffs altogether, and that board is hard mounted to a metal case, which is not ideal. We don't recommend doing that by any means. So you want to kind of take a look at your board, and you'll see on the X570 that we have 9 standoff slots, which in the Lian is all going to come kind of pre-set up for that. Some cases, if you're running like a micro ATX board in, you'll need to remove these standoffs or rearrange them accordingly to match your board configuration. Alright, once that board is secured in, you'll start installing the standoff screws. I like going from sort of the middle and working my way out. You don't have to go super tight on these, you just want to make sure that it's a nice, snug, secure fit in the case. Our motherboard is officially mounted. Next up, we're going to be doing our AIO, just to go with the Lian Galahad AIO 360. This is a 360mm cooler with some RGB lighting and fans. This is the white version of this, comes in a black as well. So you got plenty of options as far as mounting your radiator and AIO cooler. In this particular case, we're going to be doing a top-mounted radiator. There's a lot of theories on what's the most optimal, what's going to get you the best cooling. And in this case, I think it's just going to be a clean look to have the radiator mounted up top and the cables coming through onto the processor here. You're going to get a lot of hardware when it comes to AIOs. The reason for that is there's typically about 4 different processor types that the companies like Lian or Corsair are supporting for their AIOs at the moment. The Galahad is going to come with your standard Lian 120mm, but we are going to be upgrading to the SL 120s for all 9 fans in this case. The advantage of them is having the digital connection where they clip together versus the standards are going to have a lot of cables going on. When you do 9 fans with this type of cabling, it's going to be a cable management kind of nightmare. So the SL 120s are a great solution to that. It's going to really reduce the amount of cables that you have in your case, and they do look really clean as well. Alright, we moved on a little bit. I didn't want to be screwing in fans for 20 minutes on camera, so you can see here that we have the bottom, top, and side fans installed with the radiator. So next up is going to be putting in probably our power supply and our graphics card. For graphics cards, we decided to go with a GIGABYTE Vision 3080. This is a super sought after card right now. It's like one of 2 white 30 series cards. You have this and the white Strix, so they are a little bit harder to come by. But this is going to match really good with our components that we already have going for this particular build. When you go to install your graphics card, you're going to notice on the back of your case that you have some covers here. You do need to remove either 1 or 2 of them, and possibly even 3 depending on the card that you go with. There's a lot of different variations of the card that will cause you to remove a certain number of the back plates. But easiest way to do that is really lining up your card in here, kind of mocking it up, and then seeing exactly what ports or slots it's going to be taken up. You don't want to forget your peels. This graphics card's got a bunch of peels on it. go ahead and slot this card in here. So you want to line up your PCI slot, make sure the card's nice and flat, support it from the back. You'll hear similar click to kind of like our RAM sticks. Make sure it's nice and snug, and then we're going to put in the 2 supporting screws on the back of the case here. It peels all over me. Alright, last component that's going to be heading into this build is our power supply. We went with the Corsair CX750F RGB. So this is one of my favorite power supplies to use, mainly just because the cables that they come with. They come with these really nice, slick, braided cables, which isn't going to be super important in this particular build because we are running some Lian streamers, which you'll see in a minute. But any of the components that we are going to be plugging into these cables are going to look mighty fine. Alright, on any power supply you're going to have a fan that's going to control some of the heat that's coming in and out of here, so you want to make sure that's going to be positioned in your case in a way that that fan is going to be able to draw in or exhale that hot or cold air. So on the Lian, I'm going to be mounting it on the back of the case here. I'm just going to go in the lower compartment. That's going to be slotted in nice and snug here. This case is actually really interesting because you could potentially run it up here as well. You could run dual power supplies. Nobody would need to in a case like this, but it does have that capability as long as you remove that hard drive bay that we saw earlier. And last but not least, we're going to be breaking out some of the Lian Streamer Pluses. These are cable extensions to add some RGB lighting to the actual cables running through the case. If you were to run just your standard cables through the case, they would look good, but they don't look as good as some of the Streamer Plus cables that are out there, or just natural cable extensions with the braided cables. We did kind of goof though. We have the V1 of the 24 pin and the V2 of the 8 pin. So we will eventually be swapping out that 24 pin for the V2, but for the purpose of completing this build, we are going to be putting that V1 in here. Folks, and that is the completion of getting all the components in. We have a lot of cable management to do, but we're not going to show you that in this video. That's a video for another time. So now the true test is firing this thing up and seeing how it looks. Once you get all the connections done in the back, you can go ahead and turn on your power supply. You can see some of our motherboard is already showing off that RGB lighting. We got our power button up front. Holy smokes. That's crazy. Look at all that RGB, all that lighting. I'm blown away. And got our power on screen. It's a good sign. If you're not getting this, there's a good chance that you forgot about that BIOS update. But don't fear, you can definitely troubleshoot your hardware if needed, or just give us a call. Alright, there you have it guys. Our 3080 5950X build is complete. We'll show you guys the cable management another day, but man, am I stoked on this. This thing looks incredible. We got all the glass, the case all assembled, so it is ready for some gaming. I want to thank you guys so much for watching. It's been a pleasure having you guys. I'm stoked to be able to do this YouTube channel again. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe, and drop a comment down below. Let us know how we did on this build, what kind of builds you want to see. We're open for all that kind of opinions. I want to get a ton of builds going on this channel so that you guys can come back and check us out. Cactus Computers, cactuspcaz.com. Find us on Instagram, Facebook, and thank you.